and home. Let's talk about agriculture. This is AgriTalk in the Situation Room, where we promote meaningful discourse on agriculture, agribusiness, and food security for the country. So we're going to have a conversation. We talked about, the issue of safety of our food, right? When I talk about food safety, there's that story that's coming out of Lake Nakuru, advised by the authorities that, there's something happening here. There's the report that's come out from the University of Queensland, Australia, and the Federal University of Technology in Nigeria, talking about the quality of salt on Kenyan tables, and whether this salt is good. So very many things that now bring in the issue of food security, okay? We're going to have a conversation for the next 25 minutes or so with Dr. Bimal Kantaria. Dr. Bimal Kantaria is the MD of Elgon Kenya Limited, one of the oldest agri-business and input companies in the country. But also, beyond that, he is the chairman of the Agriculture Sector Network of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. He's a man who has interacted a lot with farmers, with the markets, with the industry, on issues about food. So let's bring him in now and have this conversation with him. Dr. Bimal Kantaria, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric. Thank you very much.
Now, let's just get straight into it. Agriculture is the backbone of Kenya's economy. We depend so much on agriculture. We have a large part of our country which is not suitable for growing food. Well, it is suitable, but we just talk about it being arid and semi-arid. We also talk about very many challenges that the country faces in terms of rainfall patterns, in terms of now, for example, the recent and continuing visit by locusts that come from neighboring countries on their way to other countries and what they leave behind. We talk about the climate change and the impact that it's having. When you look at all this and then you look and juxtapose that with our quest for food security, where would you say we lie?
So, Eric, I think we need to put agriculture into a little bit of a context. If you imagine, agriculture is roughly about 35 to 40% of Kenya's GDP, employs roughly 60% of our total population. 4 out of our top 5 exports are horticulture or floriculture. So it really is a massive part of the Kenyan economy. The problem over the years has been it's always been seen to be an old man's game or something we do in the rural areas. But we just don't realize how incredibly important agriculture is to the Kenyan economy. And to be perfectly honest, in the last 1-2 years, it's been very strong. It's been one of the best performing sectors in the Kenyan economy last year. It was extremely healthy. We had good rainfall. So if you put in a little bit of a perspective, I think we're on the right track with agriculture. So I think if you look at positives, we're on the right track. Of course, there are negatives like everything else. And that way, I think we will discuss it over the next 20 minutes.
One of the things that comes to mind, Dr. Kantaria, when one says we're on the right track, is something very fundamental. We talk about food security, but from a layman's perspective, why is it that despite all the wonderful news that we read and the things we are told, without fail, every single year there is a problem with that very thing, food security? Some part of the country is struck by famine. Some part of the country needs famine relief. Why is this so?
So I want to give you guys a perspective on how the Kenyan agriculture economy is structured. As you know, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been moving up the GDP ladder, if you can imagine, that we're more and more industrialized, more and more coming to the middle-sized economy. So a lot of our produce is now actually not even grown in Kenya. We grow a lot of our produce in the East African region. About 2-3 months ago, we visited both Namanga and Busia borders with the Minister of ESC and the PS, Kevin Desai. And if you go to these borders, you just can see the amount of agriculture produce being imported from Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia. A lot of these countries now grow onions, tomatoes, you name these kind of cash crops, and they're coming in from the region simply because our economy is now focused more on value addition. So all this raw produce comes into Kenya. Our manufacturers have been amazing. They now process this material into foodstuffs and then they re-export it to the region. So we are not necessarily a grower of our own food, but we are processors of our own food. And I think that's where, as any other normal country would happen, we're going up the food chain in terms of value addition. So you're right, there is ups and downs of the cycle. There are famines, obviously, but I think where we're going in the long term, I think we're going to be very big in agro-processing and exporting, and less growing our own food, but we import our own food, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing. It may, it takes some time to get your head around it, but it's not a bad thing considering that, we're moving forward as a country.
But does it mean, therefore, that even if we move away from it, that the group of individuals we refer to as the common man or the rural farmer, that they cannot actually be self-sufficient in the produce that they have? I mean, surely the two are not exclusively opposed. People can be self-sufficient in the food that they need, but at the same time, there can be food that can be processed. And I'm saying there's a disparity here, that even this basic that we once took for granted, we can no longer take for granted.
Definitely, but I think these are just demographics. And some of these things, I think we've all realized what's happening in the country. If you look at the age group of a typical farmer in Kenya, that you call him the common wananchi, you can see it's getting older and older. The young people just don't want to go in the fields anymore. So we have a slight labor shortage going on at the moment. We have a land shortage, meaning all the good land. If you just travel, say 20 kilometers outside Nairobi, which previously was all tea and coffee, you can see now it's all estates and housing estates. If you go slightly up into the Naivasha region, it's all floriculture. So just the way the demographics of the industry are progressing, young people are focused more on other things rather than just planting themselves. So we just have to face facts that some of these things have to happen. But I also agree with you, it's not mutually exclusive. We, as a country, we've now gone into more and more. We're going to high-tech farming. If you go some of our massive estates in Narok, you'll just see the technology that is going on with growing of maize, cereals and maize. It's absolutely fascinating, the technology that is now being employed in some of these big farms. Some of the combine harvesters they use in Narok, for instance, are costing $1 million. They're fully on GPS. You don't even need an operator running these machines. So, there's a disparity in what's happening in some types of, farming. There's, of course, the domestic farming, which is the household farming, which will carry on. But even for that, we're bringing in, we talk technology like drip irrigation, we're bringing in new types of seeds as a company. All these kind of things are happening. But this transition is going to take some time, but it's happening. Whether we like it or not, there's going to be a big transition in the next 20 years or 30 years in this country.
Dr. Kantaria, it's interesting that you say this because last week we had a chat with the CAS Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Nyaga, and she told us that there actually is a growing interest by the young people in terms of agriculture and farming, growing interest until so much so that they have started to institute projects where they're putting a lot of funding behind young people who then would be interested into going into this as a career. Now, with the information that you have, are we seeing that there could be some kind of collaboration between private sector and government to make sure that young people come into this? Because the reasons why previously they've not been engaged in agriculture is because they feel like, okay, it's an old person's, there's not much interest in it, there's not much money in it. But we see that there's rising interest. Is there room for collaboration here?
So Anne Nyaga is a very good friend of mine and a very dear friend of mine. She's one of the dynamic young, politicians we need in this country, and she's been heavily promoting youth in agriculture. So let me put it, she's not necessarily promoting young people go into the farming process, although that's happening quite nicely. And the young people are quite smart. They understand greenhouse technology. They understand using the right seeds and chemicals, and she's been very good at that. But both her and I, we've been promoting youth in the value chain of agriculture. So, for instance, you can have IT in agriculture, or transport in agriculture, or marketing in agriculture. So, what Anne and I have been telling everybody is, agriculture there's plenty of money to be made in agriculture for sure. But you can take different stages at where you are good at. Let's say you're a good salesperson. So you can. I know the word brokers is a dirty word in some parts of this sector, but you can buy and sell produce. You can go to the market. You can do IT in agriculture, and there's been a massive explosion in youngsters coming back to agriculture, but in different fields of agriculture. So you don't necessarily have to be a grower to be in agriculture.
Sure.
And I think what Anne is doing is fantastic.
Okay, so one big problem I think is staring all of us in the face, even as these innovations come about, some of the equipment that you talk about, world class, that we can actually use in this country, But one of the things that is huge now is waste, the management of this waste that is essentially coming back into the waters, that is then affecting the output and quality of food that now goes into the market. And we heard again from the Ministry of Agriculture that this is going to levels that are actually going to damage the food safety in this country. How can we deal with this? What actually should be done from the beginning?
Yeah, so to be honest, we have got a serious challenge there, and no doubt about that. So if you look at what NEMA did and the president with banning of plastics, of course, that was really the right direction to go as a country. The downside, of course, is that my own company, we were large producers of plastic, and when the ban came, we had to lay off several hundred people, and we lost about 200-300 million in investment. So there's a balance between development and a great environment. You need to find the balance between letting your industry promote itself and let the economy and the environment grow as well. So it's like a sustainable development model, which unfortunately sometimes we can be dragged, into one side only, but without realizing that a clean environment costs money. And as a country, are we able to afford a very clean environment at the cost of jobs and growth? So I think we have to find a good medium between environment and industry and growth and employment. But again, it's important that directly we're going in with the president's drive towards cleaning up on plastics. There's a big movement by the Kenya Association Manufacturers as well as KEPSA on PET recycling. We try to make it a circular economy where manufacturers who make PET bottles also collect PET bottles at a price. So we're all part of that initiative as well. So there's a number of big initiatives going on. But it's going to take some time. We have to change our mindsets as a country. At what price is the public willing to pay for a clean environment? And that's a debate your station and people in the private sector need to keep having.
So when you talk about now the role the private sector would play, there's issues like the Sustainable Inclusive Business Initiative, like the Agriculture Sector Network at KEPSA, and what you're doing. If we look at, for example, this particular case coming out of Lake Nakuru, where industrial waste is finding its way into the water, and then that affects the food that we consume, what is it that needs to be done so that we can control the industries better and how they dispose of their waste?
So Lake Nakuru is just a fascinating story. I don't know if you guys know the history of the Rift Valley. Over the last 10 years, the whole water table in the Rift Valley has been increasing. So I think the statistics were interesting. We went from 35 square meters to about 71 square meters. It's actually double the overall, area of water in the area. It's just a natural phenomenon. In 2008, if you remember, there was a plane crash and the plane sort of went into Lake Nakuru. And when the divers went in, helicopter, yeah. So when the divers went in, they suddenly found fish in that Lake Nakuru, and there was never fish in Lake Nakuru. And that's how over the last few years, farmers and sort of fishermen have started moving into Lake Nakuru. But obviously, it's been uncontrolled. So without anybody really realizing what had happened, fishermen were already there. So they went from Lake Baringo or Lake Nevacha, they started feeding into Lake Nakuru, and it became a little bit uncontrolled. So what the government did of this ban, I think it's great, because I think we were all sort of caught unawares of what was happening in Lake Nakuru. And now, obviously, they when they started testing the fish, they found pollution and all that in there. But I don't think that was intentional in any way. It just happens that a lot of the lakes and have broken their banks, the rising water table. So there's a lot of water in the area, and fish have now migrated into Lake Nakuru. So I think there's been now a task force that has been set up by the Ministry of Fisheries under Professor Antiba. We're waiting for the results to come out, the reports to come out. But it's just interesting how dynamics of nature can play its part. But you're right. I mean, of course, pollution played a part. But this one in particular was unusual because I think what had happened is many years ago, there was I think the Kenya Agriculture Federation had a pollution problem that sort of, because of water rising tables, it sort of swallowed that all up. But I think as a government, the new task force coming out to report, let's see what they say. But obviously, it's going to be an interesting one on how to safeguard the public with fisheries. So let's let the ban stand as far as we're concerned. And let's understand where this fish came from. How is it going to do? How are we going to control it? And is it a sustainable model in the long term?
What do you think the responsibility is of some of these organizations who, I mean, just like you said, I mean, yours that produces plastic, for example, what is the responsibility of them now when it comes to number one, protecting the environment, and then at the same time also, contributing to this fight towards food security? We often see it as responsibility of government to clean up, right? But there are organizations who are directly involved in putting it out there, if you would. So what's the responsibility?
It's a good question, and I keep telling you again that it's a national interest. I think we have to realize government can't do everything, and it's you and I and the Joe public who has to get involved and take responsibility as such. You and I sitting in Nairobi, we sometimes don't realize how it's a mindset change. If you drive sometimes on these highways and you see the car in front of you throwing plastic out the window, or all that stuff still happens, and we still haven't come around as a country to say this is our country. We have nowhere else to go. It's up to us to keep it clean. Of course, central government and county governments have to help us with proper disposal of waste and waste dumping sites and all that. But it's a personal responsibility. So that's why I think government has been focusing largely on the formal sector, on getting them organized, because it's an easier one to tackle. If you look at PET companies, it's quite easy to handle them. NEMA has been very forceful in certain areas. Manufacturers sometimes think a little bit too forceful, and sometimes we sort of struggle with new regulations coming out all the time. Okay, but we accept that as part of having a company or running a factory in this country. It's quite challenging. So I agree. It's everybody and has to take responsibility. But sometimes I feel we have to have a little bit more of a wider campaign, a wider education policy, reaching out to the public in general, not necessarily people in the big cities.
But Dr. Kantaria, the research has been done on our biggest lake, Lake Victoria, regarding pollution. And what the findings were, the one which was perhaps made public in the recent past was one by the University of Nairobi, where you had affluents directly being channeled into the lake. But what is certain and what is universal is that when you have increased human activity around the lake or whichever lake, then you will have activities which relate to humans and the productivity of humans affecting the lake very, very, very directly. Now, you mentioned NEMA. I don't want to bring NEMA into this discussion, but I have to, because they are the ones who are charged with ensuring that whatever industries are put up in such places meet certain required standards to guarantee, the safety of the water in these water bodies, and hence the safety of the human beings who also live and thrive by using this particular natural resource. Now, that clearly does not seem to be taking place, because if we say that there are industries that have increased around Lake Naivasha, around Lake Victoria, they have increased. Human activities have increased around Lake Nakuru. The population living there have also increased. Now, surely there are government bodies whose duty is to ensure that any waste that relates to our activities are controlled. But it is clearly not controlled. That's why we have the problem. Wouldn't you agree?
100%, and there's no doubt about it. We can't even argue on that one. But I think we, as a country, we have to take responsibility. We can't say government or NEMA is the only one is responsible. I mean, they're individuals. But you can see the growth of our country. Let's look at the flip side. I know you guys you have a direction with this conversation. But I want to look at the flip side. The flip side is, I look at it positively, that this country is growing. If you guys travel a lot, I know. But if you go to Tanzania and Uganda and our neighboring countries, and you come back to Kenya, you think, my goodness, this country is amazing growth. Sometimes obviously what you're talking about, unplanned growth, which I completely agree with you. But the flip side is it's growth. It's good for the country that we're all growing industries, businessmen prospering, farmers prospering. Okay, we need to get some more regulation in place and maybe enforce some of this regulation that NEMA has come out with. The number of cars on the road, I mean, we can say about pollution, but the flip side is it's a good sign for this country. And when you travel in the region that I do a lot, and you come back to Kenya, you think this country is amazing. We've got good entrepreneurs, things are moving, government is responsive to us. And sometimes, legislation lags behind sort of market forces. And that's what we've seen in Lake Nakuru. Businessmen, farmers, fishermen quickly got into Lake Nakuru without, the regulators keeping up. But I think all right, time will tell and time will catch up and regulation will catch up. But I look at positively that this country is moving ahead. We need to encourage growth. We need to, of course, sustainable growth.
Yep.
But let's look at positively, guys.
Thank you very much. And we thank you very much, Dr. Bimal Kantaria, for your positivity and for joining us this morning. Well, it's always encouraging to speak to people in business who are as positive as you are.
And we wish we had talked to him longer.
Yes.
This half an hour is really not long enough.
Yeah.
Just when we're warming up.
Yeah, we have to let you go. Thank you very much, Dr. Bimal Kantaria. He's the MD of Elgon Kenya Limited and chair of the KEPSA Agriculture Sector Network. Asante sana, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right.